Hello, this is Brad Wild, and welcome to a flight from Las Vegas to one of my favorite airports, San Jose, California. We are flying a new airplane that I have purchased recently and have been learning to fly. This is the Aerobask E1000, and this one comes with the Garmin 1000 for our navigation. The original version of this airplane came with the Skyview, which is another really great navigational tool. But I felt like I really wanted to master the Garmin 1000, and though I have yet to truly do that, we'll make a noble attempt today to use it to get from Vegas to San Jose. I will say that I'm very pleased with this airplane. After you get through some of the basics, it is easy to fly and very stable. And it's beautifully rendered, as you can see here. Comes with a good-looking family and a couple of good-looking pilots. You'll see that in a minute. But I've got the static elements in place. But you can see, even though I have my reflections turned down almost all the way, you get some really nice highlights and reflections off of these surfaces. Anyway, some great detail. It does come with a nice little menu that you can make some adjustments with. It's also accessible from your instrument panel, but you can add in some people, bags, adjust your weight. You can add fuel, which can come in handy. You can toggle your static elements. You can close the door, which we'll do. And you can turn on the ground power unit. After which you can remove the static elements and time to close that door. It's kind of noisy. And then we'll pop inside. You can still hear the GPU in the background. I'll turn it down a little bit. After we just take a quick look around the cockpit. So it feels a little bit like an automobile. It's got some nice curved panels and just feels very sleek and modern. Of course, if you're paying $3 or $4 million, that's just fine. So let's talk about our flight and how we're going to get from KLAS to KSJC. So here we are in Sky Vector, and I've got the VFR map pulled up. So we'll be flying here out of Las Vegas using the Shed SID and making a northward trek before we turn westward and pick up the Razor 4 Star into San Jose. Let's go over to our low altitude chart. And now I've zoomed in and I've pulled up our SID, our Shed 1. So we'll be taking off here to the north-northeast and then making a turn to the left and picking up our first waypoint, which is Bessie, staying under 230 knots. Shouldn't be a problem. And then I've got two altitude restrictions I want to make note of. That's at Mad Dog. I need to be at 9,000. Not above, not below. Same thing with Tark. Have to be at 11,000, not above and not below. And finally, once we get to Shed, we need to be above 14. And then, I don't know if we're going to make it, but we're supposed to be above flight level 210 by the time we get to Dirge. But we do have 45 miles, so I think there's a pretty good chance. So for the arrival side of things, we're going to be flying from Las Vegas northwest towards Keno, and then we'll make a right and begin our arrival into San Jose. Here's the Razor 4 Star, so we'll pick it up here at Stubble here, and then Razor, and continuing on, and then we're going to take a fork in the road here. We're going to go left because we want to come around the west side of the airport. We're going to be landing on runway 12 right, so we're going to be coming from the north. Now I want to just point out a couple things. We've got some altitude restrictions here. Well, first of all, this is a speed restriction of 280 knots. We have to be at 280 knots according to this on the chart. But then we can be anywhere between flight level 280 and 240. And then you can see on down. And we have another one where we need to be below 12,000 at Goti, above 9,000 at Turcotte, Google between 8 and 7. We need to be above 5,800 at Gary, and then 56 at Edmond, and then when we get to Hitter, it has to be right at 4,000. And then we get to Zorsa, and it just has us continued on a 306 bearing, and then we are to get ATC vectors to get us turned around and pointed in the right direction for our final approach. But without ATC to help me, I'm going to put in a couple extra waypoints, which I've done here. Now let me just show you the closest out. This is our approach plate. So we're going to be coming around this direction and turning right around in here, and then we're going to be picking up our tack. And this is an initial fix. It's not an initial approach fix. Initial approach fix is really a transition between the feeder route, which is our star, and our initial fix. By the time we get to our initial fix, the airplane should be pointed in the right direction and all set up and ready for that final approach. Let me just show you how that compares with coming the other direction on 30 left, where you've got two initial approach fixes. So if you were setting this up on an FMS, you would be asked whether you want to transition at Clyde or at Gilroy. You have a choice, and all this is doing is setting you up for that initial fix, which is here at Zulip. Now there's one other thing, since I have the map pulled up, I wanted to point out. You see the little lightning bolt here? This is the altitude you want to be at when you intercept the glide slope. It's called an initial approach point. This is for precision approaches. If you are doing a non-precision approach, you would be using what is called an FAF, or a final approach fix, and that's this little Maltese cross. So that's the difference between those two approaches, but because we are using vectors, we are going to just need an IF. We are back in the cockpit. I've turned on battery 1, battery 2, and the avionics master. This comes on by default, and I have the GPU running, so we have power. Let's go over to our, well, they call it the X1000, meaning X-plane, because it's not exactly like the Garmin 1000 that you would have in a real airplane. But let's start by putting in our airport of origin, and you can use your keyboard with this particular model from Aerobask. So KLAS, you just use the arrow to go between letters and enter, and now put in our destination. Uncontrolled airport of some. So we've got our origin and destination in place. Okay, moving on to our departure. This is procedure, and we're going to select departure, and we're using the shed 1, and we're taking off from runway 0 left, and we're going to be transitioning at Kino, and we're going to load that. So it fills this in very nicely, and it does put in those altitudes. You can see that 9,000 restriction and the 11,000 restriction. So all these are right off the SID that we were looking at a little bit earlier. Let's continue and add in our arrival. This will be our star, and we're using Razor 4. And our transition is going to be, well, I'm not going to really use it. I'm going to take it out, but I have to select something here, so I'm going to use Fang, and we're going to be landing on runway 12 right, which is an ILS. And now we'll load it. So if we look at our flight plan, moving on down through our altitudes, finally to our arrival. And I'm going to put in a couple of extra waypoints, if you recall. So this takes us down to Zorsa. And after Zorsa, we want to add our 2 other waypoints. So I will do that now. If you recall, those are going to be SIDB and RTAC. So I can do that again with the keyboard. Yes. Enter. And I'm going to clear vectors here. I want to delete this one and go straight to stubble. Kill that one because it takes us a little bit south. So I'm going to zoom out and just show you how you can step through. Thought I was zooming out. Okay. You can step through your route just like you can do on an FMS. So there's Bessie, Mad Dog, Tark, and so on. I won't go through all of them, but you get the idea. It's a way that you can check your work. Alrighty, it's time to get the fires lit here. So let's drop down to our start panel and lighting panel. Turn on our beacon and our nav light, and we will turn on a fuel pump. Let's see, I'm going to be using left first, so I will turn that on, and you'll see over here that we are to have at least 23 volts, and we are to have pressure of at least 15, I believe. So all that checks out. That's fuel pressure. And then you'll note here we press the start button, and when our NG gets to 9, we'll click the igniter, and when it gets to 15, we'll advance the condition lever. Alright, condition lever advanced. Watch the blade. Right now it's fully feathered, and as I push up the prop, you can see the blades turn to full RPM. Very cool. I didn't know that would be simulated. We can turn off the igniter and turn on autopilot, trim, push air. I don't know what pusher is, and I probably should know that if I'm going to be doing a video, and the only other thing is I'll turn on my taxi because we are ready to taxi, and I can't forget to kill our ground power unit. So we are all set to go. Our pilots are in place. And let's head over to runway 1 left. I'm going to advance the condition lever a little bit. And we have a very short taxi. And we need a notch of flaps for takeoff. Go ahead and put that in. That appears right here. So we're at takeoff and you get a nice readout here. I guess you would call that your FMA. Alright, before we take off, we need to set that altitude that we are limited to at Mad Dog, which is 9,000. We do want to watch our speed. I don't think we'll have a problem with 230 knots. So I'm going to change this to 9,000 just to make sure we don't exceed it, because we will reach it well before we get there. And our landing lights and our strobe, our takeoff looks good, flaps I should say look good, and igniter just in case, and we are ready to take off. So we ramp it up to 80 on the NG and release our brakes and continue our torque up to 80. And we'll rotate about now. Tap the brakes, gear up, nose down and build a little speed before we retract our flaps. 120. Nose comes down a little bit. Thing climbs like crazy. Let's put our nose down and begin our turn. Autopilot, navigation, and vertical speed. Probably don't have to climb that fast. And we can come back a little bit on our prop. No reason to burn up a lot of fuel. So we'll bring it back to around 1500 RPM. And our torque drops in proportion. So we're still burning 72 gallons per hour. And we're heading southwest to pick up our route. And we're almost to 9,000 already, so we can drop the nose a little bit. And now we're picking up our actual route. So we can turn off our igniter and we can turn on fuel auto select, so it should balance the fuel for us between tanks. So we want to be on the other side of these mountains shortly, but we're going to go around them. So here's X airports, and you can see us right here coming up on Bessie. And we're going to turn and we're going to go around the Spring Mountains. And then fly parallel to them and the Sierras up to Keno. So we are right here. And once we get the Mad Dog, we can dial up our altitude to 11,000. Alright, we've just made our turn at Bessie. And in 3 minutes we'll be at Mad Dog. We're still under 230. So we'll take a short break here. So 30 seconds to Mad Dog. I've pulled back on the throttle because we want to be under 250, below 10,000, but there's our turn coming up on Mad Dog. And now I can go ahead and increase our altitude to 11,000. And click vertical speed. Nose up. Increase our throttle a little bit. And now we're climbing towards Tark. Then we'll make our turn here at Shed and head northwest. So lots of desert. We're going around that mountain range. And I think they keep us this low because of the stars that are bringing in aircraft from the southwest. They tend to come in around 12 to 13,000 feet, so we're staying under them. And then once we get past Tark, we can go ahead and put in our cruise altitude and just climb. Not a lot to see. So, at 11,000, just before we get to Tark, just following our flight plan, it just ticks them off for us. So we can climb to our flight, our cruise altitude, 280, and I'll begin climbing. And we can climb initially about 2,000 feet, but then things will slow down as we get closer to our cruise. So, next waypoint is Shed. You can see where we are, and then that's where we make our turn and head up to Keno. Takes a little while to refresh if you're running X-Plane at the same time. So here's Keno, and we'll cross under Bishop, which is the head of the Inyo Valley, and here are the Sierra Nevadas. We'll cross over those and then begin our descent into San Jose. So I'll be back in a few minutes. So coming up on our cruise altitude, just coming through 27.7. I just had to bump up our throttle a little bit. Our speed had dropped quite a bit. And there's the buzzer. We are there. So I can come back on our torque a little bit, controlled by the throttle. Fuel flow should be closer to 45, but let's pick up a little speed and then I can make the adjustment. So the next stop is Keno, which is our transition, not Coaldale, but Keno, and that's where we begin flying westward and picking up Razor 4. So we are approaching Keno and our turn to the west. Not a lot out here. We got the Sierra Nevadas off in the distance. I think that these are the Sierra Nevadas. These are the Inyo Mountains. So we'll be flying just south of Bishop. Here's Bishop. Airplane. You can see we're just about ready to turn. Oh, that's kind of an interesting light show. I guess video cards can only handle so much. So just a few miles away and we should see the turn status here. So 11 seconds, and then we'll begin to deal with our approach, but first we need to make our turn. I did pull back on our throttle a little bit. I was doing over 320 knots and had a pretty good fuel burn going up in the 60s, and now we're down to 38.4. The highest efficiency cruise is 175 knots at flight level 340, and I tested that. I actually did a real-time flight from just outside Chicago, my home airport, KDPA, out to San Jose. Took about 6.5 hours, but I had fuel to spare. It was non-stop. So this airplane does have quite a range. Interestingly, it doesn't have a bathroom, at least in this model. So you pay $3 to $4 million and you don't have a bathroom. So be that as it may. We'll just leave it there. All right. Join me again in a few minutes. So we are right here. And probably time to take a look at our descent. So right now Stubble has us at a suggested under 2,800 feet, and I'm going to change that to 24. Whoops. Try that again. Because it'll make it a little bit easier to get down to Razor, which is the beginning of our star. So press enter. Now notice some of these are white, and that's because they are undesignated. In other words, they're suggested, but in order to get your VNAV to follow these altitudes down, in other words, to step you down, you need to turn them cyan. So it's a little bit of a process here. So you just enter. Notice it's now cyan. And if everything goes according to plan, our VNAV will follow them down. And if you were to look at our SID, if you were to look at our star, you will notice these line up. Why don't we do that? So Google has us between 8,000 and 7,000, so that is our top altitude, or the altitude not to exceed. And right on down to Zorza. So at Hitter we are to be at 4,000. And I've put this in manually, if you remember. So let's go back up and wait for things to happen. You can see here it says time to top of descent. If this stays accurate, and I say that only because I've had enough experience with this VNAV, along with my friends Steve, Haynes, and Ned, to know that it can be a little bit finicky. But this looks good. So when it gets down to 5 minutes, I can engage VNAV. And like I said, if all things go as planned, we will begin a nice step down descent automated by our VNAV. Now I can go ahead and set this to our final altitude of 4,000 feet. But you'll notice here that this is the selected altitude that the VNAV will attempt to reach, and it will adjust your descent, your rate of descent based on that. So headed over the Sierras, leaving the Inyo Valley, Mount Whitney way down there in the distance. And eventually we'll get to the Central Valley, or the San Joaquin Valley of California. Just under 40 miles to Stubble, but our time to descent is 5 minutes. In other words, it's figured out in order to get to flight level 240, we'll need to begin descending in 5 minutes, and we'll be descending at 1,500 feet per minute. So once it's below 5 minutes, I can click VNAV. You'll notice it says VPath in white up here. And now I just have to wait, and when it reaches 0, this will change to Alt V, ALT-V, and the airplane will automatically begin to descend. Alright, 22 seconds, let's see what happens. You'll notice that there's a magenta arrow. This indicates our rate of descent, and you can see that this is catching up. So this is the planned, this is what we would need to right now. So once these two match up, it should match up with our descent. And the magenta V here indicates that we should begin. So you can see our rate of descent here. and time to, notice this has changed to bottom of descent. So in 2 minutes we should be at stubble, and we should be at flight level 240. We are now at stubble, and we're just coming up on flight level 240. And notice how the next altitude has been entered here automatically, and that's Razor. And now our time to descent has changed. So in 2 minutes and 20 seconds, we should see it begin to descend again. I know this is going to get a little old, and I'll stop doing it in a minute, but I just wanted you to see again how the VNAV is working. So we've got 20 seconds to go before top of descent, and you can see this little magenta arrow falling. Looks a little bit like you'd see on a glide slope, and when it hits here we'll begin our descent at 1492. So it's usually when these two match up. See the deviation dropping to 0, and now we begin our descent down to 2200 feet. So we're still 5 miles out, so it determines when to begin the descent and the descent rate. Sometimes it can be a little bit more aggressive than other times. We're only at 3 degrees here, but I've seen it go up to 5.8. Just depends on the star that you're using. Because I'm a little OCD, I charted this out. So here's Razor, where we just passed. You can see that it's a pretty steady angle. A little bit of a drop here, a little bit more aggressive. So again, we're going to turn to the south. If we were landing on 30 left, we would take this northern fork, but we're going to go around again and land on 12 right. So we are at flight level 220. It's automatically placed the next altitude of 19,000, or flight level 190, here in magenta. Our time to descent is a minute, 15 miles out. So it will just gradually step us down, and as we get a little bit closer, usually about a minute out, you'll see these magenta angles that indicate our rate of descent, predicted rate of descent, and then this is where we are in terms of our vertical descent path. Again, it's a little bit like your glide slope. As we see this deviation drop, we'll begin to see this angle drop. I promise this is the last time I'll do this for a while. But I think it's kind of cool. And it's a rather new feature in the 11.2 version of X-Plane. So you can see it's dropping, and when it gets to the center point, down we go. And I haven't touched a thing. Notice it does say Alt-V, but so far I've been hands-off. Of course, as we get down towards our final approach, I'll have to get involved again. So that's it for right now. As we get a little bit closer, I'll loop you back in. We are at Nicked, or just about there, and this is where we make our southern turn. Our altitude's now reset, so we are right here, just past Nicked, and we're turning towards the south a little bit. And our next altitude is 12,000, and then we'll loop on around. Over the San Luis Reservoir. Very important body of water. Helps irrigate the Central Valley. And this highway here comes from the major Interstate 5 and takes us over to the San Jose Valley. And we just began our descent. Here's Monterey Bay. Monterey's down here, Santa Cruz up here. And the airport is out here, but we're going to go around it. So I'll have you join me again just before we set our final approach. We are ending the end of our star. We've got the airport off to our right, off the nose. See if I can find it here. Yep, here's the airport. And we are approaching Edmond, and probably a good time to put in our approach. We're going to go with vectors, but I'm going to eliminate that. We're just going to load it for now. And let's see if I need to do any cleanup here. Looks like I do. Get rid of our airport. And now we're ready for our approach when we need it. So again, here's KSJC, here's a Moffett Field, and KSFO is off in the distance. And while I'm thinking of it, I'm going to put 1800 on our altitude bug, because that is our FAP. That's where we're going to pick up the glide slope. So off to hitter. Coming around the west side and then turning southwest and landing on runway 12 right. I'm going to check our localizer, and here we go, 110.9. Start slowing the airplane down. By the way, I turned on landing lights under 10,000. So here's SID-B. That'll take us out a little bit so that our turn towards our tech, which is our IF, is not so extreme. And let's just want to be ready to go here. Our tech. And now we're descending down to Zorsa. And again, our VNAV is doing all of this without any of my intervention, which is kind of cool. So our next altitude 2500, then be dropping to 1800 once I activate our approach. If I did it now, we'd have this oblique angle, so I want to get up here to SID-B. Watching our speed, doesn't need to be that slow. I don't think I've ever done a video landing from this direction. And now we are right over Silicon Valley. Google, Facebook, Apple, they're all right here. Alright, and we're descending to SID-B. And I think we can go ahead and activate our approach. I think I'll keep it on GPS for right now. And as we get a little bit closer to that glide slope or localizer, I'll switch over. And we are descending. All right, we're headed in the right direction. So now I can go ahead and click approach. Gets us lined up. So when this bar swings across and lines up with this arrow, we will have intercepted the localizer. So you'll notice too that our frequency is green. That's our localizer, and you can see the needle coming across. And we should begin turning towards the airport and our runway. And time to get this thing slowed down. Overshot it a little bit. Notch of flaps. Gear down. And looking for that glide slope. It's white, meaning armed. And we have now captured it. Green. Nose comes down. I'm going to watch my speed here. Final notch of flaps. Watch that speed. Don't want to sink under the glide slope. But our PAPI lights look good. 2 red, 2 white. And our next waypoint is the airport, or a missed approach point. But I don't think we'll have any problems tonight. Now, because I'm going to this area over here, I could switch to this runway, but do a sidestep, they call it. But this, as you can see, it's flashing red. So this runway is actually closed. And it is in real life. So it's a successful outing with the VNAV. My frame rates have dropped considerably. I think it's just all the clutter. I hate for it to get below 20. But as I mentioned, this airplane is a real frame hog. Sometimes if you go outside, you'll see the numbers go up. Well, not this time. Just too much going on out here. And we can kill the AP.
500.
We're actually going to be flying into this airport in a couple of days.
400.
Only it'll be southwest. Trim the nose down a little bit.
Minimum 200.
There's our middle marker.
$100.
Again, a very stable airplane.
40.
And you fly these
30.
turboprops right down to
20.
the ground.
10.
Reverse. Little brake. And miss the taxiway. Yeah, frame rates have dropped way down, and XP is warning me. Remember, the idle speed is way up, so let's take care of that. Sorry, I'm moving my trackpad out of the way. There we go. And we can clean up our flaps. And no reason to blind anybody with our strobe and landing lights. So a decent outing in the Aerobask Epic 1000, and fine performance by our VNAV. And we'll just park it over here by this citation. Alright, let's power down. So the trick here is to feather the prop and give it a minute, and then fuel cutoff, and begin to power things down. Nice sound. Open that door. So, Bread Wild signing off until next time.